They flooded my workshop, so I shut off the water to their country club. That sounds petty when you say it fast like that, but nothing about it felt petty when I was standing ankle-deep in brown water watching 10 years of my life rust in real time. And the worst part wasn't even the damage. It was the way they said it didn't matter. I live just outside a gated community called Briar Glen Estates, about 40 minutes north of Charlotte. Big stone entrance, manicured hedges, a golf course wrapped around the neighborhood like a green ribbon. I don't live inside the gates. My place has been in my family since the 70s, long before the developers showed up with blueprints and promises. My dad built the workshop himself, a simple cedar structure with a tin roof and wide double doors that opened to the pasture. That building is where I learned to square a board, sharpen a chisel, and fix what other people throw away. A few months back, I walked out there early one morning and caught this smell. Wet wood, sour and heavy. At first I figured maybe I'd left a window cracked, and we'd gotten one of those sideways summer storms. It happens. But when I opened the door, the bottom of it dragged against something. I pushed harder, stepped inside, and my boots sank. Water. Not a puddle. Not a little leak. Full-on standing water across the entire floor. I just stood there for a second, listening to it. That quiet lapping sound against metal legs and storage bins. My table saw was half submerged, the cast iron top already blooming with orange. My hand planes were floating in a plastic tote that had tipped over. Lumber I'd been curing for a custom dining table was warped, swollen like it had given up. You ever have one of those moments where your brain refuses to catch up to what your eyes are seeing? That was me. I kept thinking, this isn't real. This is a mistake. This is something small. But the longer I stood there, the more it settled in my chest. This wasn't small. It took me 2 days just to pump it out. My neighbor, Walt, came over with a sump pump and a 6-pack, didn't say much, just shook his head. When the floor finally dried enough to walk on without leaving prints, the damage was clear. Thousands of dollars in tools. Months of work. Gone. At first I blamed bad luck. Maybe a pipe had burst underground. Maybe the creek behind my property had overflowed. So I started walking the perimeter, following the way the land sloped. That's when I noticed something new. A ditch. Fresh cut. The soil still loose and red. It ran from the stormwater culvert behind Briar Glen's 12th fairway straight down the incline and emptied, conveniently, into the low spot behind my shop. I crouched down and touched the dirt. Still soft. This wasn't erosion. This was intentional. Now, I've never been the conspiracy type. I build cabinets, not cases. But something about the angle of that trench, the way it lined up like an arrow aimed at my building, made my stomach twist. So I made a few calls. County office first. Then the water management department. Then a guy I know who does grading work around town. What I pieced together over the next week made everything a lot less accidental. Briar Glen had been having drainage issues on the back nine. Heavy rains were pooling near the greens, slowing play, costing them tee times. So the HOA board approved a runoff optimization project. That's the phrase they used. Sounds clean, doesn't it? What it meant was they redirected excess stormwater toward the lowest adjacent property. Mine. I called the HOA president, a man named Russell Davenport. Retired banker. Always in pressed polos, even on weekends. We'd spoken maybe twice before, both times polite enough. Russell, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did your board approve a drainage change that directs water onto my land? There was a pause. Papers shuffling. Then, it's within community guidelines. I'm not part of your community. Another pause. Shorter this time. It's stormwater, Nathan. It's natural runoff. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. I looked out at my workshop while he said that. The warped beams. The rusted saw. My dad's old lathe sitting there like it had aged 10 years overnight. It cost me everything in that building, I said. He sighed, like I'd inconvenienced him. With all due respect, your structure sits at a lower elevation. Water flows downhill. That's not our fault. Now here's the thing. Water does flow downhill. But trenches don't dig themselves. I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. For a couple days I paced around like a dog that can't find the fence line. Angry, sure, but also embarrassed. Like somehow I should have seen this coming. That's when something clicked in the back of my mind. The pond. There's a pond that straddles the property line between my land and Briar Glen's course. It's been there longer than either of us. My dad used to fish it with me on Sunday mornings. When the developers first bought the adjacent acreage decades ago, They asked if they could draw irrigation water from it. Back then it was a handshake deal. My dad was the trusting type. No paperwork, just neighborly goodwill. Over the years, Briar Glen expanded. Sprinkler systems got more elaborate. Their pump house, a small cinderblock structure, was built near the water's edge. I'd never thought much about it. Figured it was mutually beneficial. They kept the pond level stable. We all enjoyed the view. But standing there staring at my flooded shop, I started wondering something I probably should have wondered a long time ago. Did they actually have any legal right to that water? That night I pulled out the old property surveys my dad kept in a metal filing cabinet, spread them across my kitchen table, traced boundary lines with my finger. According to the map, about 70% of that pond sat on my land. And the pump house, that sat entirely on my side. I didn't sleep much. Around midnight, I was online reading about easements and water rights, my coffee going cold beside me. By 2 in the morning, I knew enough to feel dangerous. By the end of that week, the county records office confirmed it. There was no recorded easement, no formal agreement, just a decades-old understanding between men who shook hands instead of hiring lawyers. And one of those men was gone. I drove out to the pond the next morning and stood in front of that little pump house. Beige paint peeling, a faint hum from inside, water being pulled, same as it had been for years. I ran my hand along the metal door and felt something settle in my chest. Not rage exactly, something colder. Clearer. If water flows downhill, I thought, then so does leverage. I went to the hardware store that afternoon and bought the heaviest steel lock they had. I didn't sleep much the night before I put that lock on. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew once I did it, there was no going back to polite nods across property lines. This wasn't going to be a quiet disagreement over grass clippings. This was going to hurt them. And when you decide to hurt people who are used to getting their way, you better be ready for what comes next. Early the next morning, I drove down to the pond with a thermos of coffee and that heavy steel lock sitting on the passenger seat like it weighed 50 pounds. The sun was just coming up over the trees, mist hovering over the water the way it used to when my dad and I would fish there. For a second, I hesitated. I could almost hear him in my head telling me to think it through. But then I pictured my workshop floor, the rust blooming across cast iron, the way Russell had said you'll be fine, and that hesitation burned off. The pump house door had a simple latch. No lock, no chain, just assumption. I slid the shackle through, snapped it shut, and stood there listening to the click echo inside that cinderblock box. It sounded final. I didn't cut the power. I didn't smash anything. I didn't damage a single wire. I just denied access to a structure sitting on my property. Then I went home and got back to work cleaning tools that might still be salvageable. By mid-afternoon, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. This is Russell Davenport. Of course it was. Our ground supervisor is telling me the irrigation system isn't drawing water. That's correct, I said, wiping oil onto a hand plane that was probably beyond saving. There appears to be a lock on the pump house. There is. Silence. Not confusion. Calculation. You can't interfere with essential infrastructure, he said. I'm not interfering with anything, I replied. I secured a building on my land. That water services a private course with contractual obligations to members, and my workshops service my livelihood. He exhaled sharply. Nathan, let's not escalate this. I actually laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because of the word. Escalate. Like I was the one who dug a trench. You redirected drainage onto my property and flooded my building, I said. That was escalation. That project was fully compliant with county code. Does county code say you get to drown your neighbor? His voice cooled. Stormwater management is complex. If you have a grievance, submit it formally. I will, I said, along with an invoice. He hung up on me. The first day the sprinklers didn't run, most people probably didn't notice. It was late spring, the grass still holding some natural moisture. But by day 2, the greens started losing that neon perfection they're so proud of. By day 3, you could see faint yellowing around the edges of the fairways. Walt called me that evening. You shut him off, didn't you? He said, not even pretending to ask. Yep. He whistled low. That's bold. They flooded my shop. I know, he said. I just hope you've got a lawyer. I did. Not a flashy one. Just a local land use attorney named Carla Ruiz who'd helped me with zoning questions years back. I brought her every document I had. Survey maps, photos of the flood damage, estimates for tool replacement, screenshots of county drainage approvals. She leaned back in her chair after an hour of flipping through papers. They don't have an easement, she said plainly. And if the pump house is fully on your parcel, you have every right to control access. What about adverse use? Prescriptive rights? I asked, repeating phrases I'd picked up during my midnight research. She gave a half smile. They'd have to prove continuous, hostile use without permission. From what you're telling me, this was consensual. A handshake agreement isn't the same as surrendering ownership. So I can keep it locked. You can, she said. But they're going to push back. Push back turned out to be an understatement. By the end of the week, the course looked stressed. Not dead, but struggling. Members were complaining that the greens were running slow. A few out-of-town guests had posted photos online comparing the place to late August in Arizona. Then the letter arrived. Cease and desist. Heavy legal language accusing me of unlawful interference, demanding immediate restoration of water access, threatening damages. I read it twice at my kitchen table, then slid it over to Carla. She didn't flinch. We respond. Calmly. So we did. My letter was shorter. It included a detailed invoice for the flood damage to my workshop, complete with photos and replacement costs. It itemized 10 years of water usage based on estimated irrigation draw, calculated at standard commercial rates. It requested remediation of the drainage diversion and compensation within 30 days. The total number at the bottom was not small. When Russell called again, he skipped the pleasantries. This is extortion. It's accounting, I said. You're attempting to leverage an unrelated issue. Unrelated? I asked. Your ditch sent water into my building. That was stormwater. And your sprinklers run on pond water. Another silence. This one heavier. We will not pay a fabricated retroactive fee, he said. Then I won't provide retroactive access. You're harming dozens of homeowners who have nothing to do with this. That one almost got me. Because he wasn't entirely wrong. There were families in those houses who didn't sit in board meetings or approve drainage plans. But they paid dues. And those dues funded decisions. I didn't vote on flooding my own property either, I said quietly. By week 2, the course was visibly suffering. They tried rationing water, running pumps at off hours, but without physical access to the intake system, they were stuck. I later learned they attempted to drill a temporary well. It didn't produce enough yield. That's when I made the next move. I lowered the pond level. Not to be dramatic. Not to drain it dry. Just back to its natural creek-fed height. For years they'd maintained it slightly elevated to ensure strong pump pressure. With a few adjustments to the outflow gate on my side, I let it return to baseline. The effect was immediate. Even if they'd gotten inside the pump house, there wouldn't have been enough volume to sustain their full irrigation cycle. Water trucks started showing up the following Monday. Big stainless tankers rumbling through their manicured entrance, hoses snaking across cart paths like veins. The optics alone were embarrassing. Members in polo shirts standing with arms crossed, watching hired drivers spray what used to flow freely. Walt sent me a photo one afternoon. Caption read, "Guest Paradise needs a refill." I won't lie, there was a certain satisfaction in it. Not joy exactly, more like balance restoring itself. But it wasn't all victory laps. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I'd gone too far. If my dad would have handled it differently. He believed in neighborly compromise. He also believed in not being walked on. The real turning point came at an emergency HOA meeting they invited me to attend. I almost didn't go. Carla insisted I should. The clubhouse was half full when I walked in. Hardwood floors, framed tournament photos on the walls, a faint smell of lemon cleaner. Russell stood near the front, jaw tight. When they opened the floor, he gestured toward me like I was a guest speaker. Nathan has concerns about our drainage project, he said, carefully neutral. I stood up slowly, every eye in the room on me. I don't have concerns, I said. I have damage. I described walking into my flooded workshop. I described tools inherited from my father rusting in standing water. I passed around photos. Not dramatic, just factual. A few homeowners shifted uncomfortably. One woman raised her hand. Why didn't the board inform adjacent property owners before altering runoff? Russell cut in. The project complied with all regulatory requirements. That's not what she asked, I said. The room got quieter. Another man spoke up. Is it true the pump house is on his land? Russell hesitated. Just for a second. The structure predates current survey interpretations, which was a fancy way of saying yes. By the end of that meeting, the mood had shifted. Not fully to my side, but away from blind loyalty. 3 months of hauling water is expensive. Membership refunds are expensive. Reputation damage is expensive. Fixing my workshop started looking cheaper. 3 months of hauling water will humble just about anybody. By the time summer hit its stride, Briar Glen didn't look like the glossy brochure version of itself anymore. The fairways weren't dead, but they weren't pristine either. The greens had lost that velvet sheen. You could see stress lines from the cart paths, patches that never quite bounced back. And those water trucks, they kept coming. Every morning, every afternoon, like a reminder rumbling through their front gates that something had gone wrong. What most people don't understand about places like that is the illusion matters almost as much as the grass. It's not just a golf course. It's property values. It's status. It's the idea that everything inside those gates is controlled and curated and better than whatever sits outside. And here I was, the guy outside the gates, holding the valve. About 10 weeks in, Carla called me. "They've reached out," she said. "Through lawyers? Through accountants." That's when I knew it was serious. We met at a neutral office downtown. Not the clubhouse. Not my kitchen table. A conference room with gray walls and a long glass table that made every movement echo. Russell was there, but he didn't look as polished as usual. The tan from his regular tea times had faded. There were lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. 2 other board members sat beside him, one flipping through a binder thick with invoices. No one smiled. One of their attorneys cleared his throat. "We're prepared to discuss resolution." I nodded. "I'm listening." They started with numbers. They always do. Cost of trucking water. Lost revenue from canceled events. Member refunds. It was bleeding them. Then they shifted to my workshop. "We're willing to fund reconstruction," the attorney said, as if he were offering charity. "Structure, materials, replacement of damaged equipment at fair market value." "Not fair market," I said evenly. "Replacement value." He glanced at Russell. And I continued. "The drainage needs to be corrected. No more redirected runoff." Russell finally spoke. "Re-engineering that system will be expensive." So was flooding my building. There was a long pause. You could almost hear calculators running in their heads. "And the pond?" the attorney asked carefully. "We draft a formal lease," I said. 25 years. Annual payment up front. Indexed for inflation. Access terms clearly defined. Maintenance responsibilities spelled out. Miss a payment, access is revoked. Russell's jaw tightened. "You're asking us to sign away leverage." I held his gaze. "You dug a trench." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. They asked for a break. Stepped out into the hallway. Through the glass wall, I could see them arguing in low voices, hands moving, frustration written across their faces. Carla leaned toward me. "If they walk, this drags out." "I know. You ready for that?" I thought about my dad's lathe, about the way the shop used to smell like cedar and oil and summer air. I thought about the mornings I'd walked in there before the flood, coffee in hand, feeling steady. "I'm ready," I said. They came back 10 minutes later. "We agree in principle," the attorney said. It took another month to finalize everything. Engineers assessed the drainage redesign. Contractors drew up plans for my new workshop. Insurance adjusters poked around. Accountants argued over line items. But eventually, construction started. The old structure had to come down. I stood there the day they tore it apart, boards coming off one by one. It felt strange watching the building my dad and I had worked in disappear. But it also felt honest. That version of it had been compromised the moment water soaked into its foundation. The new one went up with treated lumber, reinforced concrete, proper grading around the perimeter so water would never pool there again. We installed French drains, sump backups, things I'd never thought I'd need. They replaced every major tool. Brand new table saw, fresh cast iron, gleaming. A new lathe, smoother than the old one ever was. Planers, jointers, hand tools still smelling faintly of factory oil. The first morning I walked into the finish shop, the light came through the windows just right. It hit the workbench top and bounced back warm and clean. The air smelled like fresh cut cedar again. I stood there longer than I expected to. Not because I'd won, because something had shifted. A week later, the lease agreement was signed. 25 years. Annual payment wired every January 1st. First payment arrived before the ink was fully dry. The pump house door now has 2 locks. Mine and theirs. Access defined by schedule. Usage capped by volume. Everything documented. No more handshakes. Briar Glen's irrigation system came back online slowly. You could see the course recovering over the next few weeks, color returning like someone turning up saturation in real life. The water truck stopped. The online complaints faded. From the outside, if you drive past today, you'd never know anything happened. Perfect greens, clean fairways, golf carts gliding by like nothing ever went wrong. But I know, every time I walk into my workshop and run my hand across that new table saw, I remember standing ankle-deep in dirty water. I remember being told it was just stormwater. I remember the feeling of being dismissed. And I remember the click of that lock. Russell and I don't talk much now. When we do cross paths, it's civil. Polite nods. Short sentences. There's an understanding there that didn't exist before. Not friendship. Not hostility. Just awareness. A few homeowners have stopped by over the past year. Some apologized quietly for how things were handled. A couple admitted they never even knew about the drainage change until the meeting. One guy thanked me, said the whole ordeal forced the board to be more transparent. I don't know if that's true. HOAs have long memories and short tempers. What I do know is this. Power doesn't always look like shouting or lawsuits or dramatic standoffs. Sometimes it looks like reading your own property survey at 2 in the morning. Sometimes it looks like understanding exactly where your boundaries are, legally and otherwise, and deciding you're not going to let someone redraw them because it's convenient. Would my dad have handled it differently? Maybe. He grew up in a time when a handshake meant something. But he also taught me to take care of what's yours, to protect your work, to stand steady when someone bigger tries to lean on you. I didn't ruin their golf course. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped giving away something that was mine, especially after they decided my loss was acceptable collateral damage. There's a part of me that still wonders if it had to go that far. If one honest conversation at the beginning could have avoided months of escalation. Maybe. But that would have required them to see me as a neighbor instead of a low spot on a drainage map. Now, every January 1st, my phone buzzes with a payment confirmation. I don't celebrate it. I don't gloat. I just file it away and go back to work. Because at the end of the day, I'm a woodworker. I build things. Tables. Cabinets. Pieces meant to last. And sometimes, when someone tries to wash your life away and tells you you'll be fine, the only real answer is to show them exactly what fine looks like on your terms. So here's the question I keep coming back to, and I'm genuinely curious what you think. Was I justified? Was this fair balance? Or did I let pride push it too far? If you were in my boots, watching your livelihood rust because someone wanted greener grass, would you have done the same? Or would you have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read more of them than you probably think, and I'm always interested in where people land on stories like this, especially when it comes to neighbors, power, and that thin line between justice and revenge. And if you want to hear more real stories about community conflicts, HOA drama, and the moments where ordinary people decide they're done being pushed around, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stick around. Because sometimes the quiet guy outside the gates has the longest memory.